when we first started our podcast, we had to get like probably 3 or 4 different websites and services going at once to record it, to edit it, to host it, and then have it approved through iTunes. And now we use Anchor by Spotify, where it's just a one-stop shop where you can record, edit your podcast, and when you distribute it, it'll go to all the platforms. So it's just everything right in one place. And the best thing is it's totally free. So if you want to get started, if you're on the fence about starting a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you want to make it simpler, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
Right. Welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast, Mindset, Exercise, Nutrition, with your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. Our goal in everything that we do is to contribute to a healthier, happier society. So the goal here today is to deliver simplistic information around warm-ups and key aspects to the perfect warm-up come down to mobility, activation, and raising core temperature and increasing circulation. So our hope is for at the end of this podcast for you to understand those 3 things and how to implement them into your routine. So let's go ahead and dive right in and let's talk about the first one, mobility. I think it goes without saying that it has an importance, but why and how do you address mobility?
I think a lot of people get confused of what mobility is, right? Or they don't, when someone says mobility, a lot of people think just stretching. Okay. Your standard static stretching. And for those listening out there, if this is a warm-up, static stretching is not going to get you there. Static stretching can influence muscle length and tension. Very rarely has it been able to influence joint position. When we talk mobility, we're talking about joints, combining joints, moving through a range of motion, fluid movement, and having the ability to cycle through, go to one side of the range of motion, and then come back and go to the other side. That is what mobility is, and the ability to move full excursion through that range of motion. Most people have had tightness in their life. We all have it. We all have limitations. We're built a little bit differently. We might not hit all degrees. I can't do a split. Nope, not even a chance going to happen. I know athletes that can, and people who can. That's awesome. This is where difference in mobility. We don't have to get to a full split, nor do the people who can split get to super tightness. What we want to do is we want to prep muscles for what's about to happen to the body in the next 45 minutes to an hour. Because your body is going to go through this very stressful situation with movements, with loads, with all kinds of demands on tendons, joints, and muscles that our body needs to be prepped to absorb that force. We've said it before, even running, you say 5 times plus your body weight, you land on your leg, your muscles, your tendons need to absorb that. If we don't have the proper movement availability to us in range of motion, we are going to absorb that somewhere else.
So if I'm in the middle of my warm-up and I'm starting with mobility and I'm doing some stuff with my legs, I'm doing stuff with my ankles, I'm doing stuff with my hips, doing stuff with my shoulders, making sure that I'm not, locked up in my rotation at all, and I notice something seems really restricted, what's the next step in the warm-up? Where would you take things?
So pick an area that you feel restricted in. And we can go from there. So what do
Let's
we want
say
to say?
hips and shoulders are probably the most common.
Hips and shoulder restrictions is very common, right? We're talking upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome, tight hip flexors, all that. Kind of going back, we don't want to
seated position, being at a desk all day, carrying a bag or a briefcase. You're getting that forward shoulder posture and that roundness in your upper back, and it leads to tightness in your shoulders. That's what he means by upper cross.
I would say it and people would be like, what is this? Thank you. So that influences tissue's position, and tissues will adapt to it. If they stay short, they'll feel tight and compressed. They also can be long and will still feel tight because they're kind of holding on. Multiple ways to do this, but dynamic movement. And what we mean by dynamic movement is not just putting your leg out and stretching it and pulling that leg back and joint. You want to put your hip through full range of motion. So if you're doing something like a quad pull, like you're going to get your leg back, you're going to pull your heel to your butt, and you're going to kind of influence and pull that leg. But at the same time, you're going through ranges of motion. You're coming from knee up all the way back and around. You can do this standing. You can do it side lying. One of my favorites out of all fours is like hip openers. Open the hip. You're telling your body, you're prepping it for, hey, we're going to go through this range of motion, and we need the muscles around the joint to turn on, turn off appropriately when we need them to. And that's the important thing if they're tight. Static stretching or just holding that stretch, yes, it will feel good. And I think this is where a lot of people go, where it feels great. But as soon as they go back, they haven't influenced joint range of motion. So that muscle gets lengthened a little bit. It comes back. As soon as they go into a lift, that muscle is going to tighten right back up because that's all it knows. If you lengthen it too much, you
weaken
desensitize the muscle, and you can actually injure it because it can't absorb that force because you've lengthened it too much, and you've altered the cells within the muscles to not understand the neuromuscular things that are trying to happen
when it needs to basically engage properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess Eric answered the question in terms of basically do some dynamic stretching.
Yep.
Movement is creating more movement. So your warm-up to ensure mobility should be a dynamic type of stretch. That can be sweeps, that can be knee to your chest, that can be quad back, reaching ankle, pulling your ankle back and then reaching your shoulder up, kind of flexing the anterior chain of your body. It can be like a pigeon walk, putting one foot on your knee and then lifting your knee and your ankle together so you get that piriformis on the outside, your external rotators of your glute and your hip there. You can do world's greatest stretch that ensures so many things: hip mobility, ankle mobility, thoracic rotation. And I do want to throw in there one caveat is if you are someone who's still not seeing the movement pattern, the proper mobility, the movement accessibility that Menchie's talking about, then it's probably time to hit some soft tissue work, whether that's a lacrosse ball, whether that's a foam roller. But we say that in a careful way because we've seen it overdone, and we've seen people spend too much time foam rolling and not appropriate, I guess, breathing. So they're basically putting something in an already painful, intense area, and they tense up, which is making it even tighter. You need to go into it with the mindset of, I'm trying to relax this tissue. You need to get it shut off, to disengage. So you're basically laying into it, feeling the discomfort in a way that allows you to cognitively breathe, diaphragmatic breathing, deep breaths in, exhaling out, relaxing that tissue, training your brain to relax that particular muscle that you're stimulating with so much extra tension, and then go back to your mobility.
And I'm glad you brought the B word up, breathing, because that's very important to mobility. Whether it's the stretches you mentioned, kind of syncing and taking intentional breaths. We've done episodes on breathings. If you need to go back and listen to the breathing episodes, but take intentional breaths, because what breathing does is each breath we take expands the body. Our body's all cavities, and we expand and then we compress. So if you're in a stretching position, you take a breath in, you're actually going to expand those muscle fibers a little bit more. And then as you exhale, what I also like to do with that is, say you're in a world's greatest stretch position, and we can link what it looks like in the show notes, or you're just going to click our link, is kind of bouncing or oscillating movements within the stretches. So you're not just in one position, but you find the stretch and you feel the stretch, and then you start kind of moving around, nothing crazy range of motion, but you move around and breathe in that position and feel the different fibers and different angles of those muscles opening up and reacting to what you're doing. That also tells the brain, hey, we're going to go through range of motion and we need to understand tension as this goes. But breathing is a huge, huge key point to breathe through into stretches and let expansion and decompression happen.
Yeah, deep breathing is scientifically proven to affect the brain, the heart, digestion, immune system, neuromuscular system. So use it to your advantage. And I think most time people don't really know what they're doing with the foam roller, so they just roll out haphazardly and too quickly, and they're not even mindfully there, present, and they go right into working out from there, not really making any change in the tissue integrity to allow for mobility. So that's a good point there. We're 10 minutes in and we just talked about mobility. Let's talk about activation next, which is the next piece. So you've already proven that we can get a range of motion. We can articulate around all our proper joints that are going to be needed to perform exercises and loaded exercises properly, so that the tensions are on our body in a way that we're seeing results from it rather than adding to imbalances or possible injury later. The next step is activation, turning on muscles that are normally off. So I think we can all agree on this one too, that those are normally glutes, core, and adductors. Maybe
Core is
another one's
adductor.
rib cage, activating your scapula to sit on your rib cage, so that's your platform. I guess I should say it like this. There's two main platforms for your body. We have an abdominal cylinder here. That's basically everything from your neck to your waist. So that's where all of your appendages attach to. And this abdominal cylinder has two, I guess, capsules to this cylinder. You have your pelvic floor, and you're activating muscles in your pelvic region, and then you have where your shoulders sit. Your scapula sits on your rib cage, and that's the platform coming from the top down. Between those two is where our core lives, and where we need to learn to activate and control. So when we go into we are anchoring ourselves to the strongest point in our body, to our midline, to our center of gravity.
And as you said, core activation, that kind of really crosses a lot. Core crosses the rib cage. Scaps are influenced by a rib cage. Core also attaches to the hips, so they're attached to that. So it's very important that people understand that aspect of activation. And I think that word gets really lost in the warm up. And I know a lot of coaches and people kind of like to get away from that. Hey, just let's not talk warm up, because I've had professors say like, hey, all you have to do is raise your body temperature 1 degree and you're warmed up. You're ready to go. Yes, that's like you're true, but that's a bold statement. So initially we have the mobility work. We're getting proper blood flow and oxygen to the cells and tissues. Boom. Now we have the activation where we need to tell the brain, tension, load, this is what's happening. You need to turn on so your body can accept this. And a lot of people miss this. They'll go from foam rolling, static stretching right into lifts, and they're not activated. How many clients have we seen, or you've seen, that they'll do that and their first set of squats or something is just not there because they don't have glutes, or they don't have their core in position and feel it. So it's like, okay.
And aside from the benefit of having someone look at you, or maybe filming yourself and looking at the form and seeing what's going on, is just noticing what you feel. And a lot of times, if you don't have your core or glutes properly engaged, when you go into a squat, you're going to feel it in your hips most likely. You might feel your lower back, because your glutes and your pelvic floor are all going to keep your hips in the right position, which is going to keep your spine in the proper position from the top phase of the movement to the down phase and back up. So if you are unable to keep those muscles on and properly holding your hips in extension, you're going to get a compensation. You're going to get, usually what happens is overactive hip flexors, overactive quadriceps are going to actually pull forward on the hips, and now your weaker core is not able to maintain the position. And what happens is you get this tilting and you get a compression in your lower back, and you'll feel probably your upper glute, lower back region taking the tension. Sometimes if your legs are too wide, you're not properly activating through the floor with your adductors in your core as well, and you're getting TFL and the external rotators of your hips. So you'll feel stuff kind of on the outside of your glute taking that tension. So there's a lot of ways that you can self-regulate and understand, was I even properly active? And if you're not, then there's things you can do in that moment to turn things on. And I think the big three that is a foundation, so super simple to execute across the board from a young athlete to an older adult, would be the dead bug, the glute bridge, and the arm bar. I
Yep.
think those kind of hit everything we'd want to see completed for activation's sake.
And
Would
what
you
I
agree?
love, yo, yes, 100%. Those are like my go-tos. In if you look at all my programs I've written, dead bugs are always there. Some sort of glute bridge activation is always there, and then adding some sort of shoulder thing always there. It's I like to tell people like this. It's like a timing belt in the car. You ever have a timing belt go bad and it squeaks and things don't time up right? Our brain's the same way. Patterns need to fire and time up right. So the whole point of activation is to prime or time and set that timing right.
And
And
you
if
have to
you
do these exercises the right way.
correct, so what I say, Matt, is the right way. Sensing them, feeling what your glutes and abs feel like on together, understanding what's going on, and being aware, having that proprioception of what your body's doing, and the kinesthetics of what's going on. And then it comes back to the, like, as you're going through this, like you said, if you don't time things up right, you just get compensatory movements. You put the tension and compression into other parts of the body that shouldn't go. And that is, if a telltale sign, if you're in the gym working out and you all of a sudden you're in a squat or deadlift and you feel your lower back on, probably means you're not activated enough to where the proper firing sequence of muscles is going on that you need to get to that moment. There's days when I go into a clean or snatch, and for me that's more complex, and I can tell when my firing pattern is not on because I just didn't do enough or I got a little lazy on my activation. And once you correct that, boom, your patterns get corrected. Neuromuscular strength goes up. You have no issues. And that's a huge aspect of why activation is so important out of a warm-up.
Because the other piece too is the activation is setting the stage for the rest of the workout so that you're training better instincts. It's not the idea that every time you go do anything in life, you need to make sure your glutes are warmed up and your core is engaged. But once you are implementing that into your training regimen for yourself and your body, it's going to layer in, and eventually your glutes and core are going to be strong enough and have the sort of the neuromuscular coding to know when to properly engage, when to properly stabilize your hips, how to keep them activated in extension so that when you go into a movement that's going to add flexion at your hips, it doesn't get overridden by your hip flexors and your quads and pull you out of position again.
Mm-hmm.
So the activation of the warm-up is setting the stage for what your body needs to improve on and how to make your system a much more efficient, productive system.
And it's another thing where people want to make it complex. Keep it simple. Keep your activation simple. Whole warm up or prep phase, whatever you want to call it, no more than, I like to say, 8 to 10 minutes. Like take that time. But if you're spending 15, 20 minutes just to get warm and foam rolling and kind of going through the motions, you're just wasting your time for the more important aspects of the workout.
Yeah, that's very fair to say. 5-10 minutes.
And what would you
If
even
you're
say,
doing
like foam
everything,
rolling? Like foam rolling, 3,
if you're
4?
doing, even if you're doing, let's take the big ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're foam rolling, it's typically piriformis, it's typically lats, shutting them off. It's typically hip flexors, TFL. Maybe you want to get your calves, and maybe you want to just foam roll your glutes.
Yeah.
You should spend no more than like 30 seconds to a minute on
Agreed.
each one.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're just not doing anything. If you're actively sitting there and engaging or like driving that ball or that foam roller into that area, and you're breathing and you're holding it and you're releasing tension out of your body, then you only need to do that for 30 to 60 seconds. If you go beyond that, then you're probably not doing it the right way. Or you have something that's extremely tight, in which case you're probably just laying on it and you're just breathing, trying to get something to just shut off. And
well, what I like to say with that too is, if you're on it for longer and it's tighter, you're also not really warming up. Remember, the foam roller is kind of moving fluid around. It's moving faster around. It's pushing blood around. You're kind of telling the body it's prepping for. There's a time and place for staying on a foam roller for 15, 20 minutes. That might be post-workout. That might be at your home later watching TV when you're in recovery phase. So there's two differences. If you're in like recovery phase, like boom, that's longer. But if you're in warm-up phase, prep, make that quick, make that dynamic movements, let your body kind of understand what's going on. And I think that's another thing. People kind of just statically foam roll and they're actually not really doing anything, but kind of telling the body, hey, we're going to lengthen, just kind of relax.
Well, I'm not trying to be a dick or anything, but some people just don't have a direction. So they go into the gym, they foam roll, and they're warming themselves up for a couple sets of walking around, talking to people, and throwing a movement in every 5-10 minutes.
That's why we're here to tell them.
That day.
We're here to tell them what's going on with this.
So, but I think it's a key part that Mitch just said is like, you're prepping. What are you prepping for? You're prepping for fight or flight system. You're not prepping for rest and digest yet. So you need to be able to perform and use your body. So keep that in mind when you're doing your soft tissue work, which should come before your mobility, dynamic movement, and then go into your activation. And in that process, let's just actually, real quick, before we get into the circulation and core temperature one, let's just run through the dead bugs and glute bridges really quick and the arm bar, just because I think it is important. And we have the YouTube video, so it'll be the link in the show notes here, so you can go ahead and watch that. I think it's like a 3-4 minute video, really quick. But the arm bar is the one where you are holding a weight straight up, you're rotating over your other shoulder, and you're stacking your shoulders in a line, shoulder, elbow, arm, and weight all in one line. When you rotate over, use the oblique to rotate over, find where the scapula is most stable on that rib cage, and boom, you're going to be strong in a lot of upper body movements, whether it's a press, whether it's a pull. That's the position you're trying to find with your scapula to ensure that you're using the right muscles. Now, different exercises might require a different position because there's no wrong position, only the one you can't get out of. But let's move on to the dead bug really quick. This one, we could probably spend an hour instructing how to do it properly. But the idea is that you are learning how to breathe, learning to activate through your diaphragm and through your pelvic flooring, at the same time disassociating your limbs from your abdominal cylinder. I see a lot of people just do a dead bug and they just move their arm to their leg with no breathing. And they're like, what am I doing this for? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You need to do it with intention and do it with proper activation of your core, holding proper position of your hips, and you'll feel it where you should, almost in being able to embrace that shake. When you get to the point where you're doing 3 sets of 5 reps on each side and you're sweating a little bit, you're probably doing it right. The last one is the glute bridge. I think it is kind of funny how I've had people do glute bridges and they're like, I feel it in my quads. It's because their hips are still out of position. They have a rounded back. They're already in that anterior pelvic position where their quads and their hip flexors are overactive. So of course, what's happening is the muscles above the glutes are pulling the hips up versus the muscles underneath lifting up from the floor up to the ceiling. So you want to really tuck that pelvis down, feel your belt buckle. I like that cue a lot. Like, feel your waistband, feel your belt buckle, be able to find that positioning so that you can feel your waistband activating across your body muscularly rather than just like tightening a belt. And then squeeze your glutes and lift your hips up. And you should feel hamstrings, you should feel adductors, you should feel glutes, you should feel core. And that's the best way to utilize those 3 activation exercises. Again, that's the big takeaway from today, is those 3 exercises. We have them in a YouTube video you can watch in the show notes. But these are the 3 steps to the perfect warm-up. Again, the last one being the step that kind of comes in every now and then if you're doing your dynamic movement and your activation properly, is increasing circulation and core temperature. Menchie, go ahead and tell us why that is so important.
Just like activation, it's telling the brain, which is our command center, that it is prepping for some sort of change to happen, some sort of stimulus to occur, and we need to be ready for this. It is going to change homeostatic levels. Those are going to be fluctuating. So for a muscle level, like increasing core temperature is also allowing the body to push blood flow out, right? You're going to get more vasodilation and constriction at the same time as you're moving and flexing muscles, but you're also pushing more blood periphery to where it's needed, right? To where things are needed. You're increasing heart rate, you're increasing oxygen push or consumption, you're increasing oxygen push throughout the body. And the importance is just is priming. I think it goes back to that word priming and prepping the body for load. So we all have heard if you start from cold, and I guess what cold means in this field is not that you just were out in 30 degrees and you're coming inside. That is one factor. You should never go from cold to some sort of heavy loaded. But cold means you've not prepped your body for any demand. So ligaments can be cold, tendons can be cold, muscles can be cold, which means the muscle spindles aren't ready to absorb that much tone, tension, force, torque, whatever it is. And if they're not ready for that, they can react by saying, hey, whoa, stop. Or we're going to tear because we're not loaded. We're not ready. It's sort of like going into a test that you know was on the schedule, but you didn't study for. And you go and it's multiple choice. And you're like, hey, I'm just going to wing it. What do you think most times going to happen? You're going to get a low score. You're going to do bad. You're going to flunk. The body's a very similar way. So you really have to prep and understand, okay, what are we going to do? And then once you get that blood flow going, warm, that comes with nutrients. You're pushing nutrients into the muscles, into the...
As well as cycling out waste products.
Yep. And that's all important. And we could talk, you don't have to like go anything crazy. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. You could go into a sauna for 5 minutes and get yourself warm and then hit activation. So it's one of those things where really it's just kind of raising your body temperature a little bit, which turns on everything else in the body. What I do lately, now that it's wintertime over here, like a hoodie. Like I get in a hoodie, I put it on, I do my warm up. Once I'm warm, I'm like, okay, perfect. We're going. The hardest thing I find for me is trying to get activation and prep work in when I'm like cold or it's colder in my gym. It takes me longer to get stimulated. So neurological response, boom. That's why warming up and actually raising your core temperature is super important here.
Yeah, like essentially another analogy for folks there who still are a little lost is just like cars. You know, if you don't warm up a car properly, you can blow a gasket, you can damage a ring and a piston itself. Or in some cases, if you're like in the Midwest, you can start your car cold and you can crack the engine block. So, you know, if you're not getting the advantage of raising your core body temperature, improving circulation, improving the vasodilation so more blood can flow through, more oxygen can come, more nutrients can come, you're not priming your system, which I love that Eric used that word, for what's to come, for being able to recover from a heavy lift or recover from whatever exercise you're doing during the training session so that you can keep going and get your workout in. Because I think a lot of times people just get warmed up in the actual set and it's really inefficient and it can lead to injury. So it makes sense to really prime your system before you get into your first working sets of your first main lift, so to speak.
Or you've lost out on quality of reps because your body's still warming up. That's another big thing.
For your body to understand that it's a stimulus that it can get better at, rather than like, oh my gosh, we're just trying to survive. We don't know what's happening right now. And I think Menchie made a good point. It's like, I do the same thing in the winter is I get warm as I'm getting mobility work in. So I'll throw a sweatshirt, sweatpants on, or if, like you said, if it's warm out, I can actually just get the circulation and core temperature going normally just by mobility and activation. But sometimes you do need to make sure you're warm a little bit first to get more out of your mobility and activation stuff.
Because with that, love the car analogy, same concept. You're getting the oil warm. You're getting the gas warm. If muscles are cool, they contract slower with less force. Enzymes move slower in cold. Warm environments speed up enzyme reactions until a certain point, right? So as soon as you start warming your cell body up, enzymes start bouncing off and spinning faster. So you get more out of that. Same thing if someone's out, you're in the cold, exercising in the cold, that happens because the muscles have less force because you're your body's adapting to that. So just you'll be aware, like, temperature does play a role in muscle contraction and enzymes functions in the cells. So that's why it's very much appropriate to warm up in some fashion. Sometimes that could be a 5-minute bike ride. You could go 5-minute bike ride, foam roll, then activation. I guess the next thing is sequence it, and then to wrap it up, like, it doesn't have to be foam roll, like activation warm up. You could kind of do them. You could, like, I'm going to increase my body temperature. Then I'm going to foam roll. Then I'm going to activate. What I do like is activation to come after foam rolling, though. I don't think foam rolling after activation is kind of like nah, don't do it.
Unless there's something alarming that popped up during activation and during the mobility work.
Yes, agreed.
Right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up the 3 steps to the perfect warm-up. Click the link in our bio if you want to watch the YouTube video to get more information. Otherwise, we put new content out every week. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're pretty much everywhere. Again, we're here to help families and businesses by helping the leaders of those families and businesses operate from abundance. Hope you enjoyed. We'll catch you next time. Think Fitness Life.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.